Please welcome to the stage Sarah Holder of Bloomberg News, Attorney General Rob Bonta of the State of California Department of Justice, and Ayesha Khan of Volunteers of America.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that housing affordability is one of the most urgent issues of our time, especially in the US. Almost half of renter households in this country are considered rent burdened, which means they spend more than 30% of their income on rent, on shelter, and that's if they can afford a home at all. Last year, a record 770,000 Americans were experiencing homelessness, according to the point-in-time count. Behind these dire figures is a national shortage of an estimated 7 million affordable homes. But one of the rare bright spots here, perhaps surprisingly, is the outlook for veteran homelessness in this country. Over the past 15 years, the number of homeless veterans has gone down by more than 50%. Veterans are the only group that saw a decrease in homelessness last year. Of course, there's a lot more work to be done in bringing veterans into permanent housing, getting that number to zero. But there's a lot to learn from the success in that space. It's been driven by a laser focus on the issue and by some deep collaborations across federal government, state and local partners, along with the philanthropic community and the private and nonprofit sectors. As we think about creating solutions to the affordable housing crisis, something I know both of you care about deeply, and bringing people out of homelessness across communities, it's instructive to look at how these kinds of effective partnerships are formed, strengthened, governed, and sustained. So I'm thrilled to introduce our panelists to speak more on these solutions. Ayesha Khan is the Chief Development Officer of Volunteers of America, Greater New York. Volunteers of America is one of the largest nonprofit affordable housing and service providers in the country, with more than 20,000 affordable units in their portfolio. They also serve 27,000 veterans nationwide with both housing and support services. And Ayesha oversees fundraising strategy for VOA's New York chapter and has played a key role in forging these kinds of partnerships we're talking about. I'm also thrilled to introduce the Attorney General for the state of California, Rob Bonta. Since starting in the role in 2021, Bonta has made housing justice a priority. He's tasked with enforcing the state's housing laws, holding jurisdictions accountable for meeting housing production goals, and protecting tenants' rights. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
So to start, Ayesha, I want the audience to get a sense of the kind of work Volunteers of America does and how you interface with federal, state, local partners, private sector, philanthropic world. Just to understand why each element is so critical here, can you share what an organization like VOA needs from each of these partners to get an affordable housing project off the ground in a city like New York?
Sure, thanks, Sarah. So Volunteers of America has been serving communities since 1896. We are active in nearly 40 states, as well as Puerto Rico, reaching 2.5 million Americans annually across our families, veterans, and seniors. Volunteers of America, as misleading as our name is not a volunteer organization. We are the country's largest nonprofit affordable housing developer, and our 130-year history really gives us the experience and credibility needed to build innovative projects at scale. Here in New York City, VOA is one of the largest housing and homeless service organizations, but we absolutely cannot do this work alone. We rely heavily on our partners to be successful. The program I'm going to highlight today is how VOA, as a co-developer, is leveraging public and private partnerships to advance housing development through our Hillside Grove project in Staten Island. This by no means is the largest project in our portfolio, but it's important and it's one that can be scaled across communities. We will be replacing a former sanitation depot with a beautiful mixed-use development that will address housing, nutrition, and environmental justice all on one campus. We'll be planting 100 trees and have multiple green spaces that will improve air quality as well as cooling effects on the local temperature. It will provide a grocery store in a neighborhood that has historically been recognized as a food desert. And it will include 232 new units of affordable housing for families and seniors, including a program I'm personally really excited about, which is an affordable home ownership model. Funding for this program is being provided not only by city and state, but also private investors through our low-income housing tax credits, as well as community developers. And in order to make this program successful from the get-go, we've done a community needs assessment, as well as other pre-work before the development was even started to make sure that we had the right buy-in from the community. So as we're seeing, as the affordable housing crisis in America continues to grow, we're seeing a lot of neighborhoods that were previously resistant to housing density saying yes to rewriting the rules. Staten Island is just one example of this. And New York is actually leading the way in changing restrictive housing zoning.
Ayesha, we'll talk a little bit more about the strategies you use to get that community buy-in. But Attorney General Bonta, California has taken steps to ensure that localities get on board with housing development using its housing element law, something you're tasked with enforcing. Can you say more about how the housing element is supposed to bring localities to the table when it comes to addressing affordable housing goals and how it's working so far in California?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Wonderful to be with you here to tell some of the California story. And part of, I think, being exceptional and being great is to recognize when you're falling short and take intentional, deliberate action. And we've done that in the state of California to address our housing shortage. We've passed quite a few new laws that create streamlined housing and expedited housing and by right housing. So if you meet certain conditions, you're building in certain places, you meet certain specifications, you can build the housing, and the local jurisdiction can't give you a discretionary disapproval. They have to allow for it. And that's because we're in a state of crisis, a state of emergency when it comes to housing. And part of our approach is what, Sarah, you've just described with our housing element law. The state takes a sort of pull the camera back, big picture approach, and looks statewide at the needs that we have to build more housing across the state. And we probably need to build 2 to 3 million more units of housing in the next decade or so to reach our goals. And then it allocates certain numbers of units to be built in certain cities and local jurisdictions. And then, so that's the big picture. That's kind of having the accountability, the ownership, the responsibility for making sure we succeed in accomplishing our state goals. But then each locality can determine how they're going to meet those goals. They can decide where, they can decide the pathway, they can decide if they want to do dense in a certain place and near transit, or if they want to build single family or whatever it might be. But it's a combination of a broad vision to meet the state's goals, and then local jurisdictions, input, participation, flexibility for how to get there. And it's an important accountability metric that has been working. Enforcement is critical as well, I think, and that's where I have come in my office, enforcing the existing housing laws. So has our housing department in California. We've worked together in partnership to make sure that everyone is accomplishing their goals, and that every city and local jurisdiction knows you don't need to do everything. You don't need to build all the housing that the state of California needs, but you do need to do something. You need to do your fair share. And if everyone builds their fair share using the flexibility and discretion that you have at the local level, then together we can accomplish the goals that we need. So I think with the enforcement, with aggressive approach, the urgency that we have, our housing element law is a good example of something that does work.
What are the key pressure points that these localities talk about when you're kind of negotiating enforcement of these housing laws, and how do you bring them to the table?
I think part of where the challenge is, the pressure point, if you will, is a history that we're dealing with where there's been less enforcement in the past. There's been less urgency in the past. There's been the ability of local jurisdictions to say, I know I have this housing element requirement, but I'm good. I'm going to take a pass. And whatever the accountability is, or maybe there's no accountability, I'll let the state or others take action, or maybe not take any action. And we saw that early on, where a number of local jurisdictions were wondering if we were going to enforce. And we wanted to be clear that we would. There were some cities that were saying things like, we're a mountain lion sanctuary, so we can't build any housing, when they weren't a mountain lion sanctuary. Or they were designating historical districts where you couldn't build more housing as a way to not build more housing. They were all, in my view, unlawful attempts to avoid their individual responsibility as a local jurisdiction to build. And so we want to work with the local jurisdictions. We made it clear we are prepared to sue if we need to. We will take you to court to enforce the law, but we prefer not to. We'd like to work with you. We'd like to make sure you know what the law is as interpreted by us, and we can work together to get on a plan to build the house. We want the housing. We don't want the lawsuit. But I think there's been a history of less accountability and enforcement than now. We're providing that, but we're also providing an open hand of partnership to work through the challenges together so we can get the housing built.
You're also highlighting an interesting point here, which is that different partners, different public and private organizations have different priorities when it comes to building housing. Ayesha, I'm wondering about whether you've observed these kinds of challenges in your work in New York, especially in Staten Island, and what kinds of strategies are most effective in getting people on the same page? Like, how did it work when you were trying to get the community to approve and bolster and champion the Hillside Grove project in Staten Island? Were there questions that came up?
I think one of the largest challenges we face as a nonprofit affordable housing developer is our ability to react nimbly and competitively to opportunities as they arrive. This is exactly where we see philanthropy and our social responsibility leaders playing a role. In New York City, we've recently launched our Housing Innovation Fund, which was started with a $20 million philanthropic commitment that will allow us to quickly react to land acquisition and pre-development costs. This will also allow us the opportunity to add some of those more innovative elements to housing that I mentioned with Staten Island that traditional funding may not cover, such as those additional green spaces, atrium-like structures that allow communities to come together, incorporating public arts into our housing developments. I think as a nonprofit housing developer, we have a unique value proposition to offer the community. We've already established trust and credibility in the communities we're serving, and we're not motivated by profit. We are reinvesting any developer fees we receive on projects back into the community, and as is evident by the Staten Island project, really revitalizing those communities, and I think that's being seen and recognized across the board.
So having that steady funding stream from the philanthropic fund allowed you to come to the community and say, look, we're working together with you, this is what we'll offer your community. Got it. Attorney General Bonta, as you work on housing element enforcement, obviously you're not it's not about the power of persuasion, it's about enforcing the law. But what role do you see for the private sector and the nonprofit development sector in getting localities to fulfill these housing goals? What kinds of projects have you seen had the most success in California?
The projects with the most success are the ones with collective buy-in, when the local jurisdiction owns and commits to its responsibility, when through the public process, the housing element is designed with input from the constituents, when nonprofits are involved, when developers are identifying opportunities, flagging obstacles, and when the process is open and transparent and there's accountability. That's where we see the most success. And it is sometimes a difficult process. The way that we feel like we can really contribute is by providing clarity, certainty, predictability about the rules of the road, making sure that the rules are clear, that developers know that they can go into a project, that the rug's not going to be pulled out from underneath them, that the approach and the laws are going to be sticky and they're going to apply, that they won't get some last minute, not in my backyard, a disapproval that says we don't want the housing, and so that they can plan, they can capitalize, they can invest, and they can build together. And the best projects are when everyone recognizes the need, they see the opportunity to do their fair share, and there are all the voices in the room that can provide the best approach for where to build, how fast to build, and then there's ownership, and then there's buy-in when the project's done.
You're talking about clarity and certainty, which brings me to speaking about the federal government right now. I know we've been talking about state and local partnerships, private partnerships, but I want to talk about what's happening in Washington. There's uncertainty when it comes to housing funding, staffing of federal agencies like HUD, and the broader economic outlook and the impact on tariffs, even on the construction industry. Have changes in Washington led to any shifts in California's strategy? First, I'll ask you, Attorney General Bonta, has it put more pressure on the work you do at the state level?
It has. The approach by the federal administration has been challenging when it comes to things like tariffs, the on-again, off-again tariffs, the toggling, the increase in cost, the lack of certainty and predictability, the inability to plan long-term and to invest at scale and know that your investment is going to be a sound one based on the rules. So the tariffs have been very challenging, and we've heard from housing developers who've said we're not building any new projects, we're holding on our current projects, we're not moving forward because of the lack of predictability and uncertainty. The tariffs, by the way, are going to cost almost $200 billion to the economy, raise prices for individuals, cost jobs, and job loss as well. And so we've actually brought a lawsuit challenging the tariffs, which we think were not brought under any appropriate authority. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act does not authorize tariffs, and we're going to be in the Supreme Court collectively as states and private actors in November on that issue. There have been challenges to the workforce when it comes to some of the policies of the administration, including mass deportation policies and just a general signaling of uncertainty and unpredictability, exactly the opposite of what the private sector wants. And so that's led us to doubling down and leaning in on enforcing the rule of law, making sure that the Trump administration only does lawful things. We've brought 39 lawsuits in 35 weeks because that's how many times the administration, in our view, has broken the law. We've been very successful in stopping and blocking some of the unlawful activities. And it certainly has hurt us in the housing space as well, with the uncertainty, with the unpredictability and the rising costs and the harms to the workforce.
Ayesha, how have you seen this play out in your work at Volunteers of America, Greater New York? Have you changed any of your funding strategies, leaning more on philanthropy, for example, or pursuing more endeavors with state and local partners?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we continue our conversations with leaders across state and local governments. However, as Attorney General Bonta mentioned, we are not immune to the uncertainty right now across policy changes, funding, and the economy. One of the things that we are doing and we're seeing as most effective is working with our partners in government to scenario plan and having them really interact with the operations that are the organizations that are on the ground and advocate together. We also rely heavily on our low-income housing tax credits that is recognized as one of the best ways to really continue to incorporate housing development into our communities, and that it has both bipartisan as well as multi-sector consensus and support, and so that's something that we will continue to look into. And of course, philanthropy. It alone will not fill the gaps, but this is a really great opportunity for philanthropies, corporate leaders to step up and invest and commit to the communities where their corporations are operating in.
I want to get both of your take on the scale question. We've talked about different strategies for engaging partners across public and private sectors. But what would you say is the number one and number two things that are really needed to scale these solutions and actually address the growing need that we talked about in the beginning of this conversation? Is it more funding, smarter funding, more political will, better zoning rules, less red tape, more tenant protections? Where can we focus our energies, or where can this industry kind of focus its energies in the months ahead and the years ahead?
I mean, I'll say that in California, all of those elements that you mentioned matter and are part of the solution, but I'll just respectfully say, and this is a role that we think is very important, that enforcement and stickiness, and making sure that the great policies the legislature has put in place, that the enormous multi-billion dollars worth of funding that the legislature and the governor have appropriated to produce more affordable housing and more housing generally, that it is delivered on the street the way it was intended to. And laws are only as strong as their enforcement. So we try to make it very clear, both with our bully pulpit and our actions, that these laws will be enforced, that housing will be built consistent with the law. We'll work with you with the open hand. If we need to, we'll have the closed fist and go to court. We don't prefer that route. But these rules are there for a reason, to get us out of our housing crisis and to build more housing.
Absolutely. What about you, Ayesha?
I think it would be an occupational hazard if I didn't start with funding first. So absolutely funding across all levels of government as well as philanthropy, but specifically funding for our low-income people and families that are often overlooked when there is a focus on market rate housing. Equally important, we need political and community consensus around the need for additional affordable housing. Funding is not going to help us if we don't have the right partners and our community on board to support.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ayesha. Thank you. Great job.